Hey folks, welcome back to another edition of the show. Midweek with Eric Smith, and my guest tonight is Blue Jays broadcaster, play-by-play man Ben Wagner. And as soon as Ben gets into the mix here, we will get cracking. I see Ben just came in. We go here. Hey,
Hey, what's happening?
not much. Good to see you.
Great to see you too.
Um, First of all, before I get cracking with anything else, everything all right for you and everybody safe and healthy? Because you bring a unique perspective, given that you're on the other side of the border right now down in the States.
Yeah, everything's fine
Yeah,
for now, right? I think we evaluate that statement day by day.
yeah,
And you track, if you're like me, everybody's sitting at home and they're consuming way too much social media, way too many news articles and things where you can just go down the rabbit hole, rightfully or wrongfully, to be informed. But yeah, things are good. Things are good from a personal standpoint. Things are good from a location standpoint as of right now. And, fortunate where baseball is kind of in my backyard. So when the shutdown happened, life wasn't rattled too much other than you were really ramping up for a baseball season to begin within 2 weeks of that time.
yeah.
But, you just kind of wait and see, and you wish that things were happening a little bit quicker of a pace. But yeah, but thanks for asking. And everything personally, and even on the extended family side of things are great. And I hope the same for
Great.
everybody.
Great. And Ben, I say all the time for folks that maybe are just watching for the first time, I've kind of dedicated this show to talking to my guests about their careers and just kind of talking the industry and broadcasting and sports in general. But the last couple of days, at least, there have been more stories coming out, more news coming out, certainly in the National Hockey League, more rumblings out of baseball, and certainly we're now waiting for some sort of news coming, I believe, towards the end of the week, likely on Friday from the NBA. So I do want to spend at least just a couple of minutes here before we get into you, just to get your perspective on where you think things stand with Major League Baseball, because they're kind of in a unique position right now. Like the NBA and the NHL had already played roughly, give or take, about 75% of their respective seasons. And it's maybe easier for them just to say, all right, as hockey already has, and we'll wait and see what basketball does. We might just fast track, go to the postseason, scrap the rest of the regular season. Football, the NFL, and the CFL for that matter, but the NFL can sit back and wait and kind of figure things out and see where things stand in the fall. Baseball's in a much different position in terms of, are we playing 100 games, 81 games, half a season, a whole season, no season at all, let alone the issues that currently seem to exist right now in terms of the owner versus the players and trying to figure out how they're getting paid. What's your perspective on all of this right now?
Honestly, it changes daily, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of a roller coaster when it comes to the emotion of this thing. There was a time that I thought we'd be shut down for a couple of weeks. There was a time in the days that followed, and right around opening day that was scheduled to be March 26th for me. It was tough, emotionally. You invest so much to getting to that point in preparation, going through spring training, everything. Right after that, I wasn't sure baseball would be able to come back at all. Just from a global scale and from where we were as awareness and what we were supposed to be doing in civic duty.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things happening at that time that were just really, really concerning. There, again, now are things that are really, really concerning, depending on where you live and where your peaks and your valleys are here on trying to. I still have many questions, but I think baseball, by and large, will give it a go and make every possible effort to really give it a go. Now, there are many layers, and you spilled out a couple of them, and it will first boil down to what the Players Association has already relaxed on their side to get it
Hmm.
ramped back up now to come in agreement in the financial terms with the owners. But I believe both sides really want it to happen. They're going to be slinging mud from both sides of this thing, unfortunately. But in the 11th hour, I think when they've got to stand toe-to-toe and go nose-to-nose, they're going to find a way to get it done and then try to lift the lid off this thing somewhere in the early stages of July. No way do I think that they're going to be aggressive in the schedule. I think you're going to have somewhere between 70 and 80 games, which by and large, I think that's a win for the Blue Jays fan base and for Major League
Right.
Baseball's fan base.
Yep.
You're going to get nearly a half season done in what looked like it was going to be left in the dust and completely obliterated because of what was happening on, and rightfully so, on the pandemic side of things, for the overall greater good. At least that has kind of backed off. We're starting to see things turn around. Some of the hot spots really cool down. And overall, Major League Baseball has not had any really disastrous scenarios where they have had outbreaks out of either where spring training was happening, on their minor league side, on their major league side, or wherever these players have dispersed that we're aware of right now.
How do you kind of see this unfolding or happening for baseball? Because, and tell me if you disagree or if you think I'm wrong here. I find in basketball in the NBA, listen, there's going to be logistical issues no matter what. We're all going through it. But when I say easy, it's easier for basketball, I would think, especially if they use this Orlando, this Disney World hub. It's easier for them because there are at least 3 gyms there, from what I understand. You have this gated community, this closed community in the Disney World property where you can house every single team. Whether you do all 30 or even just 16, you can take care of everybody in one spot. I think it's a little bit more difficult in hockey, given the fact that you're going to need, I would imagine, Ben, at least 2 different cities, if not 3 or 4, just from the ice alone, before you obviously pare things down through your rounds and get to the conference finals, the championship. But in baseball, how do you foresee this? I mean, could you see a few cities where we're playing baseball at, game at 12, game at 4, game at 8, and having a bunch of teams in one spot, maybe, pockets of 5, 6, 7, 8 stadiums? Or how are we seeing this unfold? Because, I mean, football is a lot easier too. It's once a week. You just worry about every Sunday in your one spot, or maybe even have hub cities for that. But again, they have the luxury of sitting back and watching. It seems like that logistically, it's a lot more difficult with baseball.
I think baseball, because of the number of bodies that you're trying to move,
Yeah.
and it's daily, it's every day. And in the background of baseball, what people don't realize, you've got members of the travel party if you're on the road. You've got members of the actual people that are cleared to be in the clubhouse that are in and around the clubhouse, sometimes in terms of doing their job at 10 o'clock in the morning before a 7 o'clock game.
Right.
And on top of that, you've got people that have to get in there and clean and do the services that are necessary. And that's just for normalcy. And now you throw in a pandemic and the worry about the virus. It'll be really difficult in my mind for Major League Baseball to happen in every major league city as it stands at this point, but we're still 4 weeks away, 5 weeks away from actually trying to play a game, and a lot can change. I think there will be maybe even a couple of host cities, and Tampa's right in my backyard. And where the Rays or even the Marlins could serve as one of those host cities, because you've got a closed venue. You've got an opportunity where spring training camps aren't too far away from some of these major league teams, and which I think is also really, really important, because you want some of those services for your front office, your player personnel, to have those resources at their disposal. And they're still very much on guard with harnessing their information and the sharing of that information. So, I think, just to throw out a couple of hypotheticals, while Dunedin is a great place and it's got a ballpark, it's a minor league facility right now, and the lights aren't up to standard. So that would need to be upgraded immediately, before you would be really comfortable, in my mind, to see major league caliber pitching, major league caliber hitting, and have a game at its best competition there. The facilities, while they have improved greatly at TD Ballpark, and it's great from where it was and light years ahead of where it was, it's still not a major league venue. So guys would have to come off the bus, drop their bag, get changed and ready to go on the field. Tropicana Field in Tampa would offer you a couple of luxuries. You may be able to host 2 or 3 teams comfortably. You get anywhere past that, it becomes more of a safety issue, because you have to go in and sterilize every clubhouse. And you're not just now talking about 25 guys on an active roster. You're talking about maybe rosters that have flex players on it up to 40 or 50. And then you've got the traveling personnel that have to go in and out of there. So it's really a lot of layers to peel back and try to dig through to try to get this thing where it's even in the scope of being comfortable for a player or a coach or a manager or somebody on the front office to be part of this, where you can get it, I think, where it's going to be feasible to this point to even have players on the field to even have a first pitch thrown.
The thing I find interesting as well about the National Hockey League and Major League Baseball, again compared to what the NBA may have if they ultimately opt for Disney World, is and listen, my assessment of this could be wrong as well. Maybe they'll allow the players out, but I'm kind of going under the assumption that Disney World, and anybody that's been there, it's a city unto itself. It's a gigantic gated community. You could still tell all of the players, you can go outside, you can go for walks, you can go for runs, you can go sit on the grass, sit in a park. I mean, the rides aren't going to be going, but you want to ride a bike, you want to hop on the monorail, you want to kind of explore the grounds, you can go all over the place. There's plenty of stuff to do. You just can't go out into the greater Orlando area. You're kind of in this gated community. For baseball and hockey, no matter where you go, are the players going to be stuck just in the hotels and going from hotel to stadium, stadium to hotel? Or are they going to be allowed to, run out to the CVS if they need to get some late night snacks or go to a restaurant that may be open or just wander the streets where they may run into a fan that wants that selfie, even in the midst of a pandemic, getting too close and all this stuff. I think there's those logistical issues about exposure to the public that maybe doesn't exist. Again, I'm assuming if the NBA says we're behind these gated closed doors and this is our own little world for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it may be.
That's why Arizona was so appealing in terms of the concept, right? Because you could get all the players with all these facilities that are in close proximity. I mean, there's great weather in Arizona this time of year, although it is very hot. So you would shift the games into late evening if you had to slide it on the scale just so the temperatures are a little bit more comfortable. But all the travel in the venues where all these teams could go back to one destination at the end of the night made it really appealing. You move Major League Baseball city to city to city. You just have to be outside and you're going to interact. There's 100 or if not thousands of touch points for all of us navigating in a city form that you're exposing yourself to this virus. And you're right. There are a lot of things keeping a lot of important people up at night about moving Major League Baseball through its own cities. But the pushback initially was I was a little bit surprised that there was the initial pushback from Major League Baseball players, not even the association, but the players, taking a step back away from this biodome scenario, knowing that it probably would cut out friends and family and a lot of the support networks that we see travel with these players as well. And that then I think made Major League Baseball recalculate where they wanted to go and how they wanted to do things. And if they could get back into the comforts of getting players at home and surrounded by friends and family. Listen, Arizona would have been a unique situation for me, and it would have been on the other side of the country from my friends and my family because I'm pretty much Eastern Seaboard based my entire career, let alone my entire life. So that had a lot of concerns for people out there, and it would have been difficult. It really would have been difficult. And I think the players recognize that, the families that are so vital to getting anybody through the rigors of a high pressure situation. If you're clocking into the office or going through a major project, or if you're a student, you need those sounding boards. And a lot of these guys rely on their wife, their girlfriend, their moms or their dads that are traveling in and out of these cities. And if you shut that off, that becomes almost more disturbing than actually navigating through where we've been the last 8-9 weeks through this pandemic. It becomes a really, really jarring experience.
All right, I appreciate the perspective. Hopefully, folks enjoyed that as well. I'm gonna shift the attention now onto Ben himself, folks, and we'll kind of get into that. So, Ben, talk to me about being a young kid in Indiana, growing up in Indiana, and where the bug ultimately comes from for you in terms of sports, playing sports, and ultimately your career leading down a sport broadcasting path. How does it all start for you?
For me, I think the bug really happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old. Growing up in Indiana, basketball is a huge passion. So, and it happens at every level. You want to make the junior high team, you want to make the JV, you want to make the varsity, and then you want to play for Indiana University or, the major colleges of that time. And whoever is dominating the national scape, that's where you're mimicking these jumpers. I was 6 and 7 years old, and Steve Alford was my hero, man. He was stopping on a dime. He was nailing jumpers and leading the break and running the point for the Indiana Hoosiers. And those are teams that I really started to gravitate to. And then all of a sudden there was the late 80s where the IU team was great, early 90s, which they were sensational and not only ranked in the top 10, top 5, and number 1 for a lot of that time. I mean, the electricity around the Hoosier State growing up, it was just a great time to be a kid. You had Indiana basketball. You had the Pacers that were unbelievable in the 90s. You had the Chicago Bulls. And as a kid growing up in northern Indiana, like, you could not escape the Chicago Bulls and Michael
Yeah.
Jordan, who was becoming the greatest player on the planet. Did you want to be Scottie Pippen? You know, could you mimic Horace Grant in the paint as you were going up? So sports was just a talking point for me. A lot of it was honestly connected to your life in the round ball.
Yeah.
And but then baseball really took center stage once the school year was done for me. That's when I just found so much passion in playing the game and being around my friends, honestly, from the neighborhood or from school. And then that was our rallying point where we could go to the T-ball diamond and then coach pitch and then, fast pitch and all that stuff. That became then the thing that I wanted to do the most with my friends, let alone root for. So, and about that time too, I was, you start to do some of the things on your own. You're mowing the grass by yourself and you're working with your mom or dad or your grandpa at the farm. And, you're doing those things somewhat independently, but you're looking for escapes. And that's when I found baseball on the radio when I was about 11, 12, and 13 years old. And I remember distinctly one really hot summer baling hay when I was helping out a neighboring farm. I was baling hay, and to get my mind off of the heat and the sweat that was drenching me day in and day out, I was looking for a ball game on the radio. And the Cubs at that time were playing so many afternoon games, it was easy to find some entertainment in the afternoon or early evening. So I was dialing up Chicago Cubs baseball on the radio, and this is before any Instagram, any MLB at Bat app. I mean, we were dialing it up over the airwaves, so you were hoping that you were close to an affiliate that was coming in good that day. And that's really where I got bit by the sports bug. And the leisurely approach of baseball on the radio, I connected to because of my love of the game and watching as much baseball as my brother and I could on our television growing up. And then the other thing was, in the wintertime, I loved watching Indiana basketball, but I loved listening to Indiana basketball even more so. And I had a connection with the most recognizable voice in that state, still to this day, and going into his 5th decade doing it, and still as sharp as ever, is Don Fisher.
Right.
And you would listen to these games on the radio, and you would hear the names of your heroes. Let one go from the arc or maybe from the free throw line. And, Don Fisher in this big voice would yell out "good" or "bingo" or a couple of his other catchphrases. And then you would hear the crowd explode in the background. Assembly Hall was 17 to 18,000 strong night in and night out. So, that kind of energy coming for those kind of moments and then translating and connecting with me over the radio really bit me. And, a couple of years later, a 15, 16-year-old kid took a flyer, wrote a resume that his mom helped him type out on a typewriter in his basement at home. And we dropped it off to the local guy that was doing sports at my high school station. And, he called the school one day and said, "You want to get in this thing, huh?" And kind of took me under my wing. And that was a major turning point where I had somebody give me a chance and then believe in me and kind of show me the ropes.
I want to jump back to that in a second, but one of the things you mentioned in talking there as well is, and I often say this lovingly, poking fun at my American friends, and I've got probably more relatives that are American than Canadian. I've got a ton that are just over the border in Michigan, and I often joke about how little they seem to know, a lot of them seem to know, about Canadian geography. But then over the years, as I've traveled, more and more, 15 years on the road, and I start talking to Canadian friends and Canadian family members, the lack of knowledge of just kind of pockets of the U.S. People might know, where they're going, if they're going to New York, to Florida, to California, whatnot. But to realize how close, as you were just talking about, how close Illinois, Chicago specifically, and Indiana, and Milwaukee. You ever want to do a great road trip, and I'm sure people watching have done this, but you want to bang off a few different places and kind of go through Pennsylvania, make your way down, and you can bang off Pittsburgh and Cleveland, or you can kind of go the Detroit way and the longer route, and you can hit so many different spots, and you can kind of do Indiana, Chicago, Milwaukee all in a matter of a day or so if the calendars line up with teams. So it must have been for you, as you said, especially with basketball, to have the Pacers good, the Bulls close by good in the Jordan years and those battles between those two teams specifically, but then to have Indiana basketball and the popularity of college football and especially basketball in the state of Indiana, but then also know that you still can get your fix with the White Sox, or more specifically the Cubbies in Chicago in the summertime, with Indiana not having a pro ball team. So you've kind of got everything close by and a chance to be exposed to a lot of great teams without even mentioning, oh yeah, there's still the Bears and the Packers all within this kind of little triangle, this little radius that you can get to as well.
Listen, I was growing up in northern Indiana, and it was really easy to be a very confused sports fan.
I bet, yeah.
Or take some really easy shots at your buddies, because
right.
Northern Indiana, and I grew up in like the, about 40-minute drive, let's say, from Notre Dame. And if anybody knows where Notre Dame is, home of the Fighting Irish, and by the way, they were really good when I was growing up too. So I was a really spoiled sports kid, because you just couldn't go wrong for who you were rooting for. The Cubs let you down a lot, but I mean, you could still root for them and go to Wrigley, and it's beautiful. But Notre Dame football was amazing, at that time too. So we were in, and you're right, you can do that whole Rust Belt road trip in a really short amount of time. And really cheap if you want to do it too, because they're not expensive cities to visit.
Yeah.
But you can get, and while you can do those road trips, you could get those games over the air. Northern Indiana, you could get St. Louis radio and KMOX. You could get WLW in Cincinnati, and you could listen to the Reds on the radio. You could listen to the powerhouse radio stations, and of course, you can get the teams that you're searching for, because Northern Indiana had a White Sox affiliate, they had a Cubs affiliate. They had a Tigers affiliate too, just over the border too. So if you were a sports fan, you didn't have to try that hard to get connected to sports and have a lot of it. But you're right, it was a great pocket of the country to grow up in. We found a lot of time to get ourselves in trouble, being boys along the way, but it was a great place to grow up, and it was an awesome experience to grow up, especially as a sports fan in that time.
How much did that resume that you speak of that your mom helped you type out, how much did that resume, that first job, that first opportunity ultimately help you then a few years later when you're at Indiana State and you're pursuing?
Me a lot. I'm not going to lie, because not only the radio station was WAWC, Bill Dixon was the general manager and partner there. Jason Samuel, though, was the guy that kind of took me under his wing and gave me the shot. And he said, you're going to learn by doing, and you need to experience a lot of it. And you're going to have to grow by making mistakes, by doing things live, by feeling some of the pressures and going through those reps. And ultimately, he wanted that 2 or 3 year window for me to prepare me to go to Indiana State and get ready for college, where, you could take this next big step in being a broadcaster. So I was doing everything from, logging stuff to running reel to reel to dumping in commercials to running the board for live broadcasts and remotes in high school basketball, football, and baseball was part of that too. But I was getting up in the morning and I was pulling down syndication news and sports feeds too. So not only was I in the studio doing a lot of that, but I got to hear some of the best coverage, national broadcast voices and the way they covered games, and saw it from behind the glass, so to speak, which gave me appreciation then when you're on site and you're doing remotes or you're doing the live broadcast in the studios, or if you're actually in the ballpark, for me in my present life, and how things operate. So understanding how many people behind the scenes it really takes to get something off the ground was really important. And then making that next step to college, where I had every opportunity to be on the air, and a lot of it was back to the grassroots stuff and what I was able to do in those couple of years at 103.5.
It's interesting because it's going to sound obvious in saying this, but it's credit to you and to your family for being able to help you and support you through this too. And I don't see this, disparagingly to anybody, but you're 15, 16, 17 years old. There's a lot of people they're working at McDonald's, they're working at a clothing store, they're whatever job it may be. They're not getting experience, hands-on experience that a 20 and a 22-year-old might be hoping to get as an intern, as a first part-time job in college, university. You're getting it in high school. This is a precursor to you going to school. So you must have hit the ground running big time, entering university with a ton of training that many of your classmates had none of. They just had the idea of what they wanted to do, but they didn't have the hands-on training that you would have.
Listen, I mean, a lot of people came to Indiana State and they didn't even have an air check tape, let alone
Right.
actually be live on the radio or do
Yeah.
half of the stuff that I was able to do.
Yeah.
And, go back to your first jobs. Like mine was at a lumber. My real first job where the government knows about it was I was working at a lumber store, trying to make enough money to pay for the car and gas and insurance. And, oh, by the way, kind of feed this new bug that I got bit by and do this radio thing and have enough gas money to drive to these high schools and help set up the equipment and call games into a recorder. While I was doing that, that cost money and time. But you're right. It was the experience that was then getting my foot in the door at Indiana State. And that was part of the process of me narrowing down university decisions and where to go. There are an amazing amount of institutions all over the land. But for me, I had to really check a couple of boxes. And being close to home was also important at that time as well. But it had to come up with experience and trying to get it where I wouldn't lose my track of where I was headed, because I was really feeling confident about the experience that I was getting, the feedback that I was getting from some of my mentors that I had got to know in that 2 or 3 year window, where they were encouraging me to go. And again, it comes down to the same thing of like, you have to learn by doing. And I wanted experiential learning. So first and foremost, wherever I went, I didn't really want to sit for a year or two and worry about focusing on the classwork first, and then get an opportunity to call games or be on the air. Fortunately, Indiana State told me on my first visit, because I sent them a tape and, we went over it kind of, but, they said, you're pretty far ahead of where most freshmen walk into this room and visit with us in student radio. And they had a great radio station, and Dave Sabini was waving that banner really, really boldly on behalf of the students to get them traveling with sports teams, being around sports teams and press conferences, and having access so these kids would learn. And that's one of the things that I continue to push kids to this day that want to aspire to be broadcasters, whether they want to be behind the scenes or in front of the camera or on the backside of the microphone calling play-by-play. You have to get out there and you have to get the reps done. And it takes a lot of repetition to get it done, to feel comfortable with how you are, but also just have your mind be present in these situations to call the big moments so your heart rate isn't jumping through your chest. And that comes with time. And fortunately for me, within first 2 weeks of getting on campus, I was calling a football game, with another college student. And that led on to bigger and better things. And we were covering a pretty good team at Indiana State that went to 2 NCAA tournaments in my 4 years there. And the student station was the flagship for baseball. So fortunately for me, suitcase colleges, they empty out in the middle of May. So there's 20 or 30 games left in a baseball season. So I stuck up my hand and I said, well, I'll hang out, and call more baseball. And again, those moments and being around a baseball team for an extra 20 or 30 games, man, you're living with those guys. And it's very similar to how we now operate in our professional life too. It was a huge experience.
It's interesting on this side of the border as well, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to Canadian universities and colleges, which, again, I attended and I lived through as well, and probably most of the people watching have. But there's got to be a difference in any U.S. city, given how popular collegiate sports are, but especially in certain pockets of the country, like we're talking about right here in Indiana, when we're mentioning whether it be Notre Dame or Indiana State, Indiana, the Hoosiers, et cetera. And you're calling games with 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 people, as opposed to Canadian colleges and universities where, unfortunately, a lot of the time it's 100, 200. You're lucky if there's 500 fans watching. And the broadcast should always be the broadcast. It should always be as polished, whether there's one person in the stands or 50,000. But you can't help but feed off the fans sometimes, to feed off the energy and the vibe in the building. And also, just selfishly, personally, feel like it's a bigger deal. It's a bigger moment when you've got thousands, tens of thousands of people roaring down as you're trying to make your call. And that alone, I would imagine, helps the experience when it then translates to the minor league level, to the professional level, when you're calling games and you're not just going from barely anybody in the stands to boom, you're plopped into the majors or into the minors, and it's suddenly such a big deal. That alone has got to be an experience.
Absolutely. It teaches you the human element of what you're doing too, because you can sense in an arena or in a ballpark, the big moments that are about to
Yeah.
happen, whether it's a pitch, whether it's a jump shot, whether it's a possession. You go through kind of that prep course while you're doing it in university in those moments. And like I said, I was really fortunate to be around some great teams and attend some amazing games as a fan, but also we had Holman Center, which I think the capacity then was like, I don't know, it was 5 digits. It was like 12,000, whatever it was. And, that last year when they were making their run towards a conference championship, they were getting ranking votes. The communities are on board. and while your mid-level attendance nights would be in the 5,000 to 6,000 range, you get down to crunch time. Those last couple of weeks, Larry Bird walked into the Holman Center, and you're like, well, things just got real.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the first standing ovation of the night was 20 minutes before tip-off when the Bird walked to the mid-court.
Yeah.
That was an awesome moment. So all of a sudden, like, your human emotions and that warm rush that you get in those big moments, or you try to catch your breath, you try to slow your heart rate so you make the proper call. That was an unbelievable training ground for me, and huge too, because you got to be around some of the biggest names that cover college basketball, plus in those moments when you go to the NCAA tournament. Again, geez, I like pinch myself thinking back to these things that happened in my life, prepare me for that. Like Indiana State, they're a number 12 seed. They weren't supposed to win, and they knock off Oklahoma. So they got, all of a sudden they got a shot to go to the Sweet 16, and that takes it to a whole nother level in how you're talking to your classmates at that time, let alone
Yeah.
try to be a professional. It was an unbelievable learning experience for me, and one that I'll never forget, because really it teed up the foundation of how I operate daily now.
Tell me if I'm missing anything or if I'm glazing over something, but as we get out of the university years, the first legit job in the industry is in Syracuse. If am I correct with that?
Well, so there's two Syracuses. There's the Syracuse, which
Yes.
the orange, right?
Yes.
And then there's Syracuse, Indiana.
Yes.
And,
that's yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's Syracuse, Indiana, which is
Yeah.
it's in northern Indiana.
Yeah.
It's a great community. It's got plenty of summer vibe with lakes and all that stuff. And that was actually where I was at during college. My first summer, I went back as a paid employee and intern. But that's where I got 2 or 3 years of experience when I was in high school at a commercial
Right.
radio station. And then after Indiana State is when that final semester, I went to the baseball winter meetings, and I had a chance to interview for some play-by-play jobs. And then I went to Lakewood, New Jersey.
Right.
And that was my first job in professional baseball.
And you were there for how many years?
3 seasons. I went in as the number 2. I was hired at the winter meetings in New Orleans. And then I didn't know this at the time, but the guy that was interviewing me and ultimately offered me a job was also interviewing for a AAA job at the same time. So
Wow.
I accepted, and about 3 days later, he said, be ready, have your riding shoes on, because I just got the job in Durham, North Carolina. And Neil Solondz, who actually has gone on to be a major league broadcaster from Durham, now works for the Tampa Bay Rays. And
Nice.
now we live in close proximity, but he gave me my first professional job in baseball. And as a number 2 in Lakewood, where I was doing everything from pulling tarp to writing press releases, updating the website, to checking the fax machine and helping out the sales guys and running ticket orders back and forth and emptying trash cans. Minor league baseball, especially at the lower levels, the front offices are usually pretty small, and you're doing everything. But that really wasn't a shift from what I had already been doing,
Right.
because people were giving me an opportunity to work behind the scenes in radio. And being part of that, I knew I had to do a lot of different things, ultimately to do the one thing I really wanted to do, and that was to call innings. And, and the GM and Jeff Brown in Lakewood would say this, he goes, I don't care if you can't set up the radio equipment until it's like 6:57. Just get us on the air, but it's still going to be the last thing you do in your day, because there are a million different responsibilities. So
Yeah.
3 great seasons in Lakewood, and still saw some names go through Lakewood that had major league experience, let alone in the current major leagues as well at that time. So, and it was a great franchise to work for and cut my teeth. And that had a lot of different levels too of excitement because First Energy Park in Lakewood, it was a brand new franchise. That part of the country, or the Eastern Seaboard, if you're familiar with the shore, or the shore in Jersey, but also the show Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
That was huge in the early 2000s. Well,
Yeah.
Ocean County is where Lakewood is located, where the ballpark is, and that Toms River, Asbury Park, which Bruce Springsteen is from. You get into Belmar, where a lot of the scenes were filmed from that show, as outrageous as it was. With Snooki and JWoww and all those characters. That was the backdrop, and that's exactly where I was. So it was a really unique place to actually have a job. And then baseball was in the middle of it, right? But the franchise was doing so well in selling tickets. And then we would go on the road. And listen, the guy in the first row could hear what I was calling in terms of play-by-play. In Hickory, North Carolina, in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then you go to Asheville. The league was on a different sliding scale when it came to the financial background of what owners had invested in it. But again, some nights I'm calling games in front of 12,000 people in the ballpark, and other nights I'm calling the game in front of 12 people in the ballpark. So that was a really good learning experience too. And it ultimately, because of that Lakewood franchise, got me an opportunity to go with one of the crown gems in professional baseball, and that's to get to Buffalo.
So two things. First of all, I'm picturing a younger Ben Wagner with a gold chain and a white tank top and just
and a fade with some spiky hair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. That's my first thought. Second, though, but just let me back up for a second before we move forward. When you're at Indiana State, and as you said, you're telling me stories about calling football games, calling basketball games, baseball games. What ultimately led to that interview? I know you said you went to the baseball winter meetings and ultimately landed this job, but were you prepared to call basketball, call football, call whatever, or were you pursuing baseball more than anything?
At that time, I was pursuing baseball.
Okay.
That is where really my passion wanted to go. I wanted to be involved with a professional sports team in some capacity. I thought I was a realist, right? I knew I wasn't going to walk in to Indianapolis and be the number one voice of the Indianapolis Indians, or the baseball team, or, go to name the AAA city. You just aren't in that opportunity going to go and do that as a 22, 23-year-old, let alone even try to scratch the surface of, going to the Pacers or the Bulls or the Blue Jays or a major league team. Come on. You needed to have more experience. And my last year at college, I'll never forget the conversation. It was with David Wilson, another ISU broadcast alum, who had gotten hired in some similar fashion to me. And he had done AAA games. He was now a voice of a minor league team in a brand new franchise outside Cleveland in East Lake, Ohio, in the Lake County Captains. And my program director said, call this guy, because if you want to get into baseball, and again, you have these people that believe in you behind the scenes, and they say, you know what, you're really good at some of these things, but baseball, I think it's where you could really take off. And Indiana State had a couple of guys already working in professional baseball. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to call them. David Wilson, he was great. He goes, look at the lower level teams that have a lot of turnover and give young broadcasters a chance. They either hire seasonally, or the guys that are there and have full-time jobs will bring in number twos, and you'll get amazing experience along the way.
Yeah.
And you're going to have this awesome springboard for your next gig. Your next job could get teed up because of the experience that you could get at one of these teams. So that's going to be really important for you. Okay, how do you find these teams? So I scoured the internet, I got on message boards, and I tried to network one level deeper as I could. And David Wilson said, go to the winter meetings. There's a whole job board room. It'll be overwhelming. It'll look like chaos. You're going to see front office people that work in baseball wearing polos and khakis, or maybe not even a polo, but some t-shirts. But be a professional. Take a shirt, a tie, and a jacket if you own one, and sell yourself in this role. And the last thing he said was, and it's so true, and I've used this line on young broadcasters as well. And it's changed a little bit because, Eric, if you remember your first job, you probably applied with either a tape or a CD, and you would drop it in the mail, right? I was the same way. I was ripping off all these CDs. He goes, listen, when you get down there, don't take 50 CDs and resumes with you. Take 10.
Right.
Because there are not going to be that many jobs. You're going to see all these postings for ticket takers and ushers and, you know, marketing interns. He goes, there's going to be like 15 jobs open, you know, for broadcasters or media PR people. Okay. So I took 20, you know, whatever. Took 20 resumes and tapes. And you just go with job board by job board, and you thumb through it. And you try to, you know, figure out, one, I was willing to move anywhere and just do anything to get that first step in the door. And I'd sent a tape and a resume to Neil Solondz in Lakewood, and he liked what he heard. So I knew I had one interview lined up by the time I got to New Orleans in 2000. That was 2003. 2004 was my first year in Lakewood.
Yep.
So I was really fortunate. I had time. So I mean, the stars were kind of aligning at that point for me, but that's kind of how I first decided that I'd rather try to be linked in professional sports with a professional team, to go that route versus go back and rightfully or wrongfully small market radio or television or mid-market, you know, wherever you could find a job. Because, you know, I thought, well, I really didn't want to do a number of sports. I thought if I could kind of get myself into professional baseball, that would be a great turning point for me. So pretty awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, kudos to you for pursuing it the way that you did and having that drive. Okay, so 3 years in Lakewood, 2007, Buffalo, and working for the Bisons, as you say, one of the greats in minor league baseball in terms of the franchise, and you're there for quite a while until coming north of the border. But before we get to the Jays gig and ultimately landing that, in your own words, you call it one of the jewels, one of the gems. What made that organization and that market for baseball so good to be, as you say, one of the gems? Why?
It starts with ownership, and that's really where everything in my mind in minor league baseball and the teams and the facilities, the franchises that succeed, first and foremost, it starts with their ownership. And Bob and Mindy Rich had a long time in Buffalo being invested either through Rich Products or just individually with sports on some scope. And it could have been the chairman and Robert Rich, or obviously his sons are now heavily involved and the entire family's involved. But Bob Rich and Mindy Rich together had a passion for making the ballpark in downtown Buffalo a destination. They had visions of Major League Baseball succeeding in Buffalo, and a fan base that in Western New York and Southern Ontario was wild about that possibility happening. Maybe the Blue Jays at the time in the late 80s and early 90s weren't so wild about that because it would have been right there in a border battle. But, you know, you had a different way of doing things in Buffalo, and it starts back to where they put the first shovel in the ground in the mid-'80s, trying to build that ballpark. And the ballpark that revolutionized how one major league franchises would look then at building ballparks in their own communities.
Yep.
But also then with Buffalo is drawing almost 1.7 million, you know, for a ballpark that was big, and it held at the peak of its capacity, held over 20,000 fans with the bleachers in right field, and because they were preparing to have a ballpark that would go up to major league capacity.
Right.
They dialed it back as the 90s wore on, but the onus on being the best and trying to provide for the front office, for a fan base, for the players that were there in that given time, in that window, with that season, that's the onus. That's what they wanted to accomplish. And that has the trickle down, you know, where you look at things, and as a broadcaster where you can travel, you know, you see things on the road you like, you see things on the road you don't like. And I'm talking from a franchise perspective, where you're taking all these little things as you travel, and you're telling, you know, maybe a concession guy what you saw, how this team is doing something. And you're telling the sales guy, oh, I like this promotion on the field. Or I saw this is the way they're displaying, you know, corporate partnerships, you know, in different ways. And they're going to take that nugget of information and they're really going to divest it. And they're going to look at it and how maybe they could improve on their own things in Buffalo. And, you know, with the size of the franchise and with the money that was backing and the resources that were available, you felt really fortunate. And in Buffalo, my first or second year on the gig, we had a TV deal. A lot of minor league teams don't have TV deals, or maybe it's 1 or 2 games. We had a flamethrower for a broadcast network,
Yeah.
and a 50,000-watt clear channel station that you can get in Boston, Massachusetts, or in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you can get Buffalo Bison's games on the radio. And in most markets, you've got a small wattage of coverage. And so those are just some of the things too that make the Buffalo gig a lot different. And also, being a professional in the Big Four, where you've got the Bills and you've got the Sabres, you've got a different kind of classification of media in terms of what they expect in coverage. So all these things woven together make it one of the most really coveted jobs in my mind in baseball, period.
Interesting as well that in going to Western New York and calling the games for the Bisons, things kind of come to some extent full circle for you, or at least you get to tap into experience in the past and just fandom of the past, in that an opportunity arises for you to now get back to some basketball roots as well. So I'm sure hardcore Ben Wagner fans know this, but for folks that maybe don't know, as much as you're the voice of the Jays now and you did baseball for years in Buffalo, and prior to that, as we talked about in Lakewood, you also are a basketball guy, and a lot of folks in Western New York, Southern Ontario know you for your basketball work as well. Maybe you can tell the folks about how that arose for you and the opportunities that existed there.
Oh my God, I'm telling you what, that got me through Western New York winters, is the ability to get courtside and call basketball. So my first or second year in Buffalo, and they had, resources that were available with mid-major colleges and universities that were in my backyard. And I thought, well, maybe I could pick up some radio gigs or some television gigs. And at the time, the sports network that was helping produce regional broadcasts needed some guys with basketball experience. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I was getting a ton of college basketball experience. And I was doing Canisius and Niagara and the University of Buffalo, and then going down to St. Bonaventure to call some great A-10 games at that same time. So, I was dodging a lot of snowflakes in those travels at the same time. And then, TV led to some radio opportunity to fill in for UB. And then ultimately, the Golden Griffins said, we've got this opportunity where we're going to do some things on radio, and we need somebody to come in and do a lot of radio coverage. Would you do it? And it's a labor of love for me. I love calling basketball on the radio. And there's an art to it where you take little bits of what you do in baseball, and you take my passion for the game and the nuances and just the challenge of being a descriptor and trying to paint faster on this canvas for basketball on the radio. I just jumped at the opportunity, and those were some of the great 3-4 years towards the tail end in Buffalo for me, to get a chance to work with the Golden Griffins and call basketball on the radio and really do it from wire to wire, which was just awesome.
Was it tough for you to make the transition, or was it enough separation season to season? Because it's not like you're really overlapping, but it can be difficult at times, I would imagine, to kind of put one hat on, put another hat on, and be kind of flip-flopping like that. Or did you have enough separation with the, kind of summer versus winter? Yeah,
fortunately for me, I had enough separation, because in the minor leagues, the minor league season will end on Labor Day in the United States. So the first weekend of September is usually when minor league baseball shuts down. And the Bisons in my tenure never went to the playoffs, so I had an early exit. And then college basketball ramps up somewhere in mid-November.
Yeah.
And then most of the conference tournaments are done the first or second week of March. And for me that had no spring training obligations, I could take a couple of weeks, kind of reset, get my final prep in, and then just kind of launch into the minor league baseball season, which was usually, give or take the first week of April. So there was about a month gap at the end of basketball, getting into baseball, where I could recharge the batteries, settle down, and then get ready for one sport to the next. So, college basketball would be a little bit more of an interesting beast with this job, because the season's longer. There's a commitment to cover spring training games. If you're with a team that's really good and can go to the NCAA tournament, then you've got even more hoops to jump through. But fortunately for me at that time, I could dial it back with some opportunity to kind of recharge and reset.
It's interesting thinking about you in Western New York and trying to, draw some sort of comparison or parallels to just me as a fan in general. I've mentioned to the audience many times before and on social media and whatnot. As a guy who was born and raised in Burlington, I'm kind of, for argument's sake, right in the middle. I've got Toronto about 30 minutes to the east, and I've got Buffalo about 45 minutes to the west. And as a kid, it was easier to get tickets, and it was certainly cheaper to get tickets as well, to Sabres games than it was to Leaf games. So I ended up becoming more of a Sabres fan than I did a Leafs fan. I'm not anti-Leafs. I still, in a sense, pull for the Leafs because I know it's good for certainly our industry now and our employers. It's good. It's good for the, for the area, the greater Toronto area. But, if I really had to kind of pick my fandom, it's probably geared a little more towards the Buffalo Sabres, other than anybody or anything connected to Wayne Gretzky, because Wayne's my guy. But I'm also a big Bills fan, huge Bills fan. Tough thing is, though, as we get older and we get into the industry, and I'm certainly not saying this in a negative way or complaining, it's hard to follow other sports when you're so invested in the team or the sport that you're working for, that you're calling. I enjoy hockey. I'm not anti-hockey, but I'm so into the NBA and calling Raptor games, traveling with the Raptors, watching other games for opponents that are coming up. I just don't have the time to watch hockey. So I can become more of a baseball fan in the summer because my season is generally over. I've got some downtime. For you in Western New York, you've got the Sabres, you've got the Bills, but you're calling baseball, you're calling college basketball. Can you even keep an eye on what the Blue Jays are doing, what the Leafs are doing, what the Raptors are doing, what's happening just over the border? I mean, how was that for you, where you're close, but you're far, and you're busy as hell too?
Yeah, when it comes to being a fan, I didn't really stray too far from the roots. We're still huge Indianapolis Colts fans. So on Sunday, that's my time. Sunday on Colts game day, that's my football time. And I'm not a big fantasy sports player either, so I haven't let that consume my life. Where hours and hours and hours of conversation on message boards and stuff, don't dominate my my off season when it comes to the NFL. Those are really, really important 3 or 4 hours where you can kick back and just have a beer and relax as a fan and just cheer and do that kind of stuff. When it came to Western New York, of course I wanted the Bills and the Sabres to win because everybody in Western New York was happier when that was happening. I've learned this quickly. In the GTA, things are better when the Leafs are good, so I want the Leafs to be good. And trust me, our house was absolutely electric when the Raptors were going through the playoffs, and we had an unbelievable backdrop to this. And my wife was on the street partying when we were on the road when the Raptors won the championship. And I was actually in Toronto at the apartment not too far from the Rogers Center when the horn started honking and going crazy when they clinched the playoff berth. So that stuff is just easy to get wrapped up into, right? I mean, in those moments where you live and you know where you were and where you are as things are unfolding. And parade day was awesome because we went down to the arena and we were right there in Jurassic Park for all of that as you guys were going by on the buses. I mean, that was an incredible experience just to be part of that day. And then I had to, you talk about resetting. Holy cow, I had to dial it down and then go call a baseball game that night.
Right.
After standing in the sun all afternoon. Incredible experience. But, you're vested in it because you have to have a pulse on the cities that you're living. And things that are important to those franchises and those teams, and of course the huge moments are obviously huge, and you're going to know that easily. But you have to know enough to be dangerous, especially if you're going to be on the air. And like I said, in Buffalo, you were connected enough to know about the Bills and the Sabres, and people that I worked with every day, were living and dying with every win and loss. People that I worked with, that I talked to every day, are living and dying with every bounce of the ball for the Raps now, or every push, that the Leafs are on. And that's important, because it is the part of the fabric of a city now that I'm so well connected to and love. But, and this too, by working in sports, the faces will change a lot. And you get connected to some of the people in your crisscrosses of working in the sports industry. And those are the relationships that you value, and you end up rooting for the people that come along in your life way more than you will ever really root for a jersey. And while, trust me, I love the Blue Jays, and 2013 was kind of my indoctrination with the Blue Jays and that relationship. Think about all the players that are no longer with the Blue Jays that came through Buffalo or came through Toronto, that I've had this connection. and they now wear other Blue Jays. Well, it's an easy handshake from Jay Happ in the New York Yankees clubhouse. And it's an easy, lean in for that hug with Kevin Pillar if we're going to Boston, or last year when we were in San Francisco or the Giants came to see us. So those are the kind of the relationships too that kind of float you along on the sportscape. So not only are you keeping really close tabs on the actual franchises themselves, but you're really keeping the close tabs on the individuals and how they're performing.
So, Ben, we've got less than 5 minutes left here. And this kind of leads perfectly to maybe the last point. We started the conversation this hour talking about, Major League Baseball, the Jays, everybody trying to come back. But for you now in your career, as we talk about you to wrap things up, coming, to the ultimate point now, we're getting a crack at the major leagues. 2018, hired to replace a legend in Jerry Howarth, and folks have been listening to Jerry, and obviously prior to that, Tom Cheek for decades in this city. That opportunity for you, after all you've been through, after all you've done in your career, to be in Major League Baseball. Not only what was that like for you, but for your family back in Indiana, back at the farm, listening to the games, to know Ben Wagner is now the voice of one of 30 teams in the world. That's got to be huge.
It was incredibly overwhelming, I'll be honest. I don't know that our emotions could close it out in the 3 minutes that we've got left.
Really. Yeah, we got 3 now.
Yeah, we got 3 now. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was an incredibly humbling experience, one, because I grew to love Jerry from the first time that I met him in the fall of 2012, and he had been a huge supporter of mine, supporter of the relationship, supporter of my first ever games in Major League Baseball, and that was in September of 2017. So to have that connection meant a great deal to me. But it was also the labor of love and all of those ridiculous bus rides and airport delays that you went through and calling games in front of literally nobody, and knowing that only friends and family and a lot of my family was listening on the other end. It was a great moment of satisfaction and culmination where you finally felt like everything that you'd put in and the hours behind the scenes and the people that were trying to prop you up when you were at your lowest. Not only were you able to accomplish your goal, but you were able to shed some at least happiness into their life because they invested so much in you and to get you to that point. And being a huge cheerleader in the background, I missed out on a couple of major league jobs before I got this one, and that was awful. I'm not going to lie. I mean, think about any big promotion that's you're hoping for in your life, or maybe you're hoping for your son or your daughter to get, and when they come up a little bit short, it's crushing. It's crushing for the individual. It's crushing for the family that goes through it too. But without that support, I wouldn't have been able to get to where I was, and obviously where I am now. And it's been an unbelievable ride the entire way, and hopefully we're just scratching the surface on some of the unbelievable moments that are yet to come.
Well, Ben, listen, I appreciate you doing this tonight and sharing so many stories. And listen, you and I have had a chance to connect a couple of times off the air, but our paths haven't intersected a whole ton. So I look forward to getting to know you even more as the years go on. And I've enjoyed when you've invited me up to the booth, and you've been down to a couple of Raptor games as well. So hopefully we get a chance to work together more as the years evolve. But more than anything else, I hope we both have work to do very soon this summer in the NBA and in Major League Baseball. And I wish you nothing but the best and continued health and happiness to your family and all your friends.
Same to you, Eric. And thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight and jumped in. Continued health. Stay safe.
All right. Thanks, Ben. And thanks to everybody watching. I'll be back again tomorrow night with another show at 10 o'clock on Thursday night. Again, this was Ben Wagner and Eric Smith. Thanks so much, folks.
Thanks.
Take care.